should the Denver Broncos utilize their top pick in the NFL draft in 2026? And does the wide receiver room have a sneaky amount of work that needs to be done before the Broncos take the field next season? All things to come on today's rundown. Thank you so much for joining us. While you're here, make sure you like and subscribe to that Denver Sports 1043 The Fan YouTube channel. You can find us at Denver Sports 1043 on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. If you're watching us on X or on Facebook, we love you. We appreciate you. Regardless of where you consume us, make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Denver Sports 1043. Comment to get in on the action. And turn on those post notifications so that you never miss a moment with us. Want to get into a couple of things today as it relates to the Denver Broncos, primarily a response to one of the first, you guessed it, mock drafts of the 2026 NFL season. The Super Bowl body is barely cold, and yet mock draft season is already upon us, thanks to many outlets nationally, primarily the focus of today's show being Field Yates of ESPN, who put out one of his early mock drafts for this offseason and has the Broncos picking at 30, which is fun to read in and of itself, because if you had said prior to this NFL season that the Denver Broncos were going to be picking 30th in the NFL draft, boy, I bet you we all would have signed up for that. Even the most optimistic of prognosticators, the Cecil Lammies and et cetera of the world, didn't have the Broncos winning 14 games in 17 tries, especially considering 2 of their 3 losses came in the first 3 weeks of the season in walk-off fashion in back-to-back weeks. So clearly the Broncos have set themselves up for an exciting offseason where we think a lot of offensive emphasis will be applied both in free agency and the draft. And that mentality transfers over, or is certainly felt by Field Yates, who with the 30th overall pick in the 2026 NFL draft, he predicts the Denver Broncos will select Oregon Ducks tight end Kenyon Sadiq. He is a 3-year player in college and was a standout tight end for the University of Oregon last year. The top tight end prospect in the NFL draft, 50 catches for north of 550 yards and 8 touchdowns in his 2025 season in the Big Ten. And it's clearly a position of need for the Broncos, right? Now, Field Yates does acknowledge that Kenyon Sadiq lasting to the 30th overall pick in the first round would be kind of a blessing for the Broncos, because his market, his range, and his value at his position within the draft certainly opens up a world where he gets selected far before the final 3 picks or so of the first round. But in Field Yates' early initial mock draft for the 2026 season, that is not the case. So how do we feel about the Broncos going tight end early in round 1, or I should say in the draft, but late in round 1 in 2026? It certainly was an object or a point of emphasis last draft when they ended up going with Jahdae Barron, 20th overall, and then RJ Harvey after trading back twice in the second round, late there with the 60th overall pick. And I think when we did redraft conversations just about a week or so from today, a week prior to today, I told you flat out, and I agree with that, I would have been fine if the Broncos had gone tight end in the first or second round in the 2025 draft compared to the 2 picks that they chose. Running back and tight end last year were 2 major points of emphasis that had to be addressed. They ultimately went corner and running back because they signed Evan Ingram in free agency to be their joker tight end. Well, unfortunately, tight end and running back are going to be 2 major points of emphasis this offseason. Once again, it might just be a little bit mismatched as to how they get there or how they address those positions on a timeline type of basis. Free agency obviously comes before the NFL draft, and if the Broncos decide to go out there and take a swing on an Isaiah Likely or a Dallas Goedert or a veteran tight end of that ilk, that could certainly impact it. But my gut says you're not going to that well 2 times in a row. The Denver Broncos took a swing on Evan Ingram this past offseason in free agency to be their offensive kind of joker crown jewel that Sean Payton's offense has been missing during his first couple of seasons in Denver. I think the likelihood that they go back to the well for another free agent tight end, which also could factor in cutting Evan Ingram, triggering a $10 million dead cap hit that I don't see likely, considering all the dead cap that they just offloaded with Russell Wilson's contract finally being in the rear view. I don't see them going back to that well in free agency once again. But I could very well see them drafting a tight end like Kenyon Sadiq if he's available in the first round, late in that 30 type of range. And I think the Broncos would be wise to at least strongly consider that. I personally would be in heavy favor of that. You know, the adage that you see on your screen there, the ducks fly together, right? The mighty ducks. A crossover from college teammates like we saw with Bo Nix and Troy Franklin doesn't always guarantee some kind of chemistry. And that's not, even though it could be cute to align it that way, that's not the primary reason I would go there. The primary reason is the Broncos don't have anybody with the skill set, the explosive playmaking ability, and the opportunity to make things happen in space on their roster. You can't just keep trotting Adam Troutman, Nate Atkins, and Lucas Kroll out there, especially if Evan Ingram's not giving you what you were wanting or what you were seeking when you paid him on a 2-year deal in free agency. I mentioned it before. The Denver Broncos already went the free agent tight end route last offseason with Evan Ingram, and it just hasn't panned out. Could that change in 2026? I suppose. It's less likely, but I suppose. I also think it's unlikely that they cut Evan Ingram because of the dead cap capabilities there, which is why I think Field Yates's prognostication, his prediction that says that Kenyon Sadiq, if available at the 30th overall pick in the first round, is a good fit and a likely prediction for the Broncos. I agree with the logic. I understand the sentiment behind it, and I would be thrilled. I would be jumping for joy with that prospect of a playmaker at the tight end position to be able to be versatile in space, to open up more opportunities in the middle of the field, and not have to necessarily be thrust into that limelight right away when you have a potential bridge opportunity there for a year overlap with Evan Ingram. There are other positions of need on the roster that need work, but the tight end position in round one, just like it could have been plausible in the 2025 draft if Colston Loveland and or Tyler Warren had been available in a trade scenario or otherwise, or if they had addressed it in the second round, perhaps with like a Terrence Ferguson or a Harold Fannin, that type of thing. The same position of need exists in the 2026 offseason, and I think Field Yates puts a strong case forward for a playmaking tight end for Denver to acquire next offseason. Well, time to hit the turn, presented by the Birdie Bar, Louisville's premier outdoor golf bar and entertainment venue. With their miniature golf setup and heated patio, they have the perfect cure for your winter blues. There are other pass-catching rooms on the Denver Broncos that may need a little bit of a glow-up heading into 2026. And again, not really a conversation we thought we'd be having this time last year, because the Broncos have invested pretty heavily in wide receiver in recent years. They paid to retain Courtland Sutton. They drafted Marvin Mims early. It was Sean Payton's first big splashy draft pick on the offensive side of the ball. And then they bring in Troy Franklin. And then they bring in Pat Bryant. So in consecutive years here with Sean Payton, you have an early round, highly touted draft capital piece being utilized at the wide receiver position. And yet, aren't we still here kind of wondering whether or not we've got enough in that room if we're, evaluating the Denver Broncos? Sutton's now making north of $30 million a year. He's their $92 million man. And it was a little bit of a disappointing season, I think, from Sutton's perspective. The drops were abnormally high compared to years previous. His production was still there, but there were stretches of the season where the target share seemed to be a little bit out of whack in favor of Troy Franklin or of less productive or trustworthy wide receivers. And we still didn't really have a wide receiver to emerge or materialize the way that we thought that it would. Marvin Mims continues to be this like ambiguous figure within the offense that we don't really know on a week-to-week basis or season-to-season basis how he's going to evolve within Sean Payton's scheme. Troy Franklin looked like he was poised for a breakout type of season in training camp and in the offseason leading up to the 2025 campaign. And it didn't really materialize as much consistently throughout the year as we thought. He had some games down the backstretch of the season where we felt like, hey, there's something here. There was plenty of games where he had like less than 50 receiving yards in a game, 20 receiving yards in a game, couple of catches, juxtaposed with certain situations where he was getting 8 or 9 targets in a game and leading the team offensively in that category. And then there's Pat Bryant, who I think came on early and earned a lot of Sean Payton's trust from a blocking perspective, and his intelligence and his ability to digest things as a rookie. And things kind of progressed later down the backstretch of the season, in the postseason especially, before getting knocked out with concussion issues. He was showing to be somebody that Bo Nix had developed a rapport with. He caught 3 consecutive passes to start that Bills game on the opening drive. But it just feels like there's not quite enough there, right? And the Broncos are firmly entrenched in those wide receiver type conversations in the offseason about potential landing destinations for George Pickens, maybe Tyreek Hill. There's plenty of Alec Pierce, Jerry Jeudy, right? There's all kinds of wide receiver names being thrown around because the Broncos still clearly have a need in that room. And that's not going to change prior to free agency or the draft, because we won't have an evaluation period until that point where we can say with any kind of substance to draw our eyes from to say, hey, we don't need to go that route. So until we're proven otherwise, this Broncos offense was not productive, explosive enough in the pass game or the run game to reasonably think they're going to be able to replicate a 14-3 season that required double-digit amount of fourth quarter comebacks, heroic efforts, defensive dominance, especially on the front half of their schedule, that allowed them to stay in some of these games that they otherwise wouldn't have. To me, the evolution of the wide receiver room for the Denver Broncos boils down to, honestly, one singular player, and that's Marvin Mims. If the Denver Broncos are going to continue to get this inconsistent, up and down, Jekyll and Hyde, hot and cold Marvin Mims that we've seen, which sometimes is through not as much of a fault of his own, in my opinion. I think it's just a factor of Sean Payton not being able to utilize him in a consistent way within the offense. Then, yeah, this wide receiver room needs help, because you've got a wide receiver 1 in Courtland Sutton who is on the wrong side of 30 by NFL standards and had a little bit of a more downward facing year in certain areas, especially drops, than we thought. Troy Franklin and Pat Bryant are going to, in a perfect world, continue to take second, third, et cetera, year steps at their specific career trajectories. But is that going to be enough? It could be enough if Marvin Mims, who's an all-pro in the return game and shows an ability to utilize some game-breaking speed and things of that nature down the field, if you can get a more consistent version of that, then I think maybe the wide receiver room looks different, and your approach to the draft and free agency at the wide receiver position look different. It all comes down to Marvin Mims for me. If you get the Marvin Mims that we saw against the Buffalo Bills, where he had almost double-digit catches for 90-something yards and a touchdown, and he was clearly the focal point of the offense, if you can get that version of Marvin Mims on a reasonable week-to-week basis, I don't think this wide receiver room needs as much help, especially not to go out and sign a high price free agent in the offseason or use top-tier quality draft capital to kind of fill that hole. But if not, if you get the Marvin Mims that's consistent with what we saw for a lot of last year and really a lot of his tenure as a Bronco, and if Troy Franklin and Marvin and Pat Bryant aren't able to take significant leaps in that wide receiver room to be more reliably productive and incorporated into the offense, then yeah, this wide receiver room is going to need some significant help, because again, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I think there is a little bit of an element with that with the Broncos wide receiver room, that they can't underutilize or undervalue the importance of adding to or rounding out that room, and then be in week 9, 10, 11 of the season going, gosh, well, we just don't have guys that can make plays. We don't have guys that can catch the ball. We don't have explosive playmaking ability. We can't utilize the middle of the field. You can't have that. So you can roll the dice on those young guys and Troy Franklin and Pat Bryant taking big leaps and bounds, step forward in years 2, 3, et cetera. And you can roll the dice on Sean Payton doing something that up to this point through 3 seasons here in Denver, he hasn't been able to do, which is find consistent, reliable work within the offense for Marvin Mims. Or you can go out and take an equally risky gamble by paying a free agent wide receiver this offseason north of $20 million and really bloating the capital investment within that room. Or instead of taking Kenyon Sadiq in the first round, taking a wide receiver or utilizing a second round pick or even a third round pick again in that regard for back-to-back seasons. There's plenty of avenues to take for the Denver Broncos as it relates to shoring up that room, but all of it depends on Marvin Mims. It's going to be an exciting weekend upcoming of sports. We've got the NHL with the Olympic break and all the hockey going on. Gabe Landeskog getting hot on the ice, scoring a goal as the captain for Team Sweden. Canada destroying their opening round matchup with Czechia and Marty Necas. And Team USA playing just a little bit actually from right now. So lots of fun action in the world of the NHL. The All-Star break for the NBA is upon us, and we will see how the USA versus the world format shakes out. Jamal Murray in the All-Star, the three-point contest, and really how this team's going to open up and respond after a bit of a skid into the finish line leading into the All-Star break, how they are going to respond coming out of the All-Star break, and what will be an all-important push toward postseason seeding ahead of what we hope is a deep playoff run. Thank you all so much for joining us. Like and subscribe to that Denver Sports YouTube channel, and we will catch you tomorrow at noon for the next rundown.